Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Greg Crabtree is a speaker, author, and entrepreneur who has helped thousands of business owners cut through complexity and take real control of their financials. He's the author of 2 game-changing books, Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits, and Simple Numbers 2.0, Rules for Smart Scaling. And he also contributed to Vern Harnish's Scaling Up book. Greg chairs the EO at Wharton Executive Education Program and trains entrepreneurs globally through EO Accelerator. He's also the founder of SimpleNumbersCRI.com, where he and his team support mid-market companies with financial clarity, capital strategy, and smart growth decisions. This is Greg's second time on the podcast, and I'm thrilled to have him back to talk about the shifting economy, shifting demographics, artificial intelligence, and what business owners need to get right in this new era. Greg, welcome back to the podcast.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Brad.
Let's start with what the numbers are telling you. You've got arguably the largest data set of mid-market company financial information based predominantly in America, but it's certainly huge. What are the rolling 12-month data trends saying about the real state of the economy now? And how is that story different from the headlines, do you think?
Yeah, unfortunately, it continues to be a little bit dissonant with the headlines. Keep in mind, over 60% of the U.S. economy is by privately held businesses, probably somewhere between 60 and 70%. We've become much more of a private company dominant economy than a public company economy. And with that, the government has largely, they're totally blind as to activity in the U.S. Unlike Australia, you guys are unique in the sense that the government actually gets monthly revenue data, monthly labor data. We do not get that in the U.S. And it would be helpful if they did. I would probably, my clients would be mad at me if I recommended the government do that. But at the end of the day, our 100 company model, it's about 1.2 billion right now. So average about $12 million of revenue, from businesses all across the U.S., all different industries. So we try to get a reasonable basket. We're not trying to match the CPI. We're trying to match the real economy, the things that people buy with, HVAC services, IT services, retail, building products, building services, all of those kinds of things. And so we feel like it's been a pretty consistent picture of the economy. What I would tell you is it's still largely what we call an upstairs, downstairs economy. About 70% of the revenue that we're tracking are companies that are up this year over last year to the tune of about 15%. And you'd think, oh, that's great. Well, unfortunately, the other 30% is down 10%. And the clear distinction between the ups and the downs is the ups are the necessary businesses, the downs are the discretionary businesses. And there is just this absolute clear distinction that the economy is not even to everybody. And this is really probably a unique time in economic history where that's the case. The up companies that are, as we call the necessaries, they can pass through their cost increases to whatever they need and just reprice. They're not making egregious profits, so they're good, but they're not ripping off the marketplace, in my opinion. But the downs have cut, and they're trying to find the floor. They're trying to find the core demand of those discretionary customers. And we're seeing it in products, we're seeing it in services. And well-run businesses that were hitting their profit targets 2 years ago that are now at half the level of profitability that they were 2 years ago, having fallen almost 15 to 20% in revenue in the past 2 years. And those companies, I got a distress call from a really well-run company, and they were panicked. I mean, they were saying, "Oh my goodness, everything's falling apart," and they were living the great life. I mean, just excessive profitability because they were just on a hot run in an online services business that they were doing really, really well with. But they hit the wall with consumer demand. And it's just one of those that no matter how much somebody loves you, when that consumer has to start making switching decisions at the end of the month as to what they spend their money on, the harsh realities, come out. If I had to really, I mean, watching this now for almost, oh gosh, we've been tracking this data since 2013 when I started working on the second book. And so we're now, 13 years into tracking. What I give the government wide latitude in terms of the actual, calculation of GDP, because it's a difficult thing, because how do you manage gross domestic product when it's largely a services-based economy? We don't sell widgets. And even the people that sell widgets, they're not exactly the same. But when you look at it overall, my sense is we're probably close to flat to negative 1% GDP over the last 18 months. If I was going to apply just my visioning of the data, looking at it logically, who's raised prices versus who's not increased. And also when I look at headcount increases in labor, wages are going up in those necessary economies, because when you're looking at HVAC companies that need 4-year journeyman techs, I mean, those guys, once they become a 4-year journeyman, they're going to make $100,000 a year. Yeah. And so you've got to constantly raise the wages of those people, and there's not an excessive amount of them either. So at the end of the day, when you just kind of interpolate all the numbers, I would probably say the economy is relatively flat. Now, you got some sectors that have some advanced spending, but it's not massive overall. And being a kid who grew up on a chicken farm in Alabama in the southeast U.S., I just keep asking the question to everybody. Says, listen, if total population is flat to declining, total workforce is flat to declining, how do you have an expanding economy? And the first thing people will say, oh, AI, technology. Well, great. That's one side of the economic equation. That's the production side. Last time I checked, economics requires two things, a producer and a consumer. Yeah. And last time I checked, technology does not consume, and probably never will. And so therefore, now, is that a bad thing? And this is where I've kind of tried to sound the alarm to people. It says, listen, don't be drug along by thinking of the last 25 years. This is a totally different economy, and it's not going to grow because of demographics. But so what? Does everybody have a job? Does everybody have something to do? Right now, they mostly do, but as we were talking pre-call, we are starting to see a softening of the labor market. And you can go back and listen to my previous podcast and things that I was expecting a spike in shortage of labor in the summertime right now and a spike in wages. And that has not happened. And there's really two answers for that. One, the economy is softer than we expected, but it's more so AI is truly taking people's jobs right now at a much more rapid pace than I ever anticipated. I would say in the last 60 days, I have seen more indications of deployment of AI in a way that truly takes away employment in a major way.
Absolutely. And we're seeing the same thing. Anecdotally, every meeting that I'm going to, the other side is raising AI. And many times people are saying things like, well, we were going to hire a couple of people, but now we're not. We're doing it with AI instead. Or the thing that used to take 3 weeks is now taking 3 days. We're seeing that this is not a one-off. We're seeing lots and lots of people say that. I want to go back to the numbers, and we're definitely going to come back to AI. Uh-huh. But to pick up on what you said then, you spoke about demographics, number one, and you spoke about the economy is broadly flatline. The economy data, the data on the economy that you're seeing is flatline. So what is the government saying that the economy doing? Saying that the economy is doing A, and then B, how is inflation playing into that as well? Like, what is the broad inflation numbers?
Yeah, right now in the U.S., we're looking at about 2.5% GDP from the official statistics, and about 2.5%, slightly under 3% inflation is what they were saying. And so the idea is, if that was true, then I would see somewhere around 5% real growth.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I am seeing about 7% revenue increase year over year of the businesses that we're tracking. But the thing is, just because your revenue goes up doesn't mean output goes up.
Yeah.
And so how much of that is price increases, in that? And I can tell you, I mean, we work with this is data we touch every month. And so this is a little bit different than accountants who just touch year-end data, and this is not data that is self-submitted by the customers. This is data we touch, we filter. We've got super high confidence that it's telling the truth. And it just shows that no, it's a lot weaker, than that. And on the other side, we're starting to see more and more businesses look at where are they settling. And so the last 25 years, it was grow, 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 grow.
Yeah.
And now people are starting to say, we're good. We're profitable. We're hitting, just to remind everybody, our metric for profitability is unique in the sense that we don't look at profit to revenue, we look at profit to gross margin. And so when you take revenue minus cost of goods sold that don't have any labor in it and get to gross margin, that is the real true economic top line of all businesses. And so then we can start talking about profitability with another business that's not like ours, and we can have a sane conversation for a change. So is what we're saying, we want a 15% minimum profit to gross margin, 20% is the target, 25% is the stretch. If you're above 25%, book it while you got it. The market will compete you back eventually. And those businesses that are at that 20 to 25 range, they're making more and more decisions right now to just pause, unless you've got a unique opportunity to grab market share because the market is not growing.
Yeah.
But you can grow if you get market share. And I'll give you a practical example. So we do this mastermind group with a group of HVAC companies. And the guy that had the greatest growth last year was in Central Florida, and he grew almost 40% last year. But it wasn't the market grew. Florida wasn't growing that fast. He hired away his competitor's plumbing team and won the two big industrial contracts that team was performing. And then over the next 12 months, he actually replaced almost all that team because they weren't really very good employees. But he kept the customer and made them much more happy. But he stole market share by that process.
Yeah.
He totally And so growth, as we're seeing it right now, is not linear. It is spurt, pause, spurt, pause. And then sometimes shrink because you got a bad sector that that's not good, that's not profitable, we can't fix that, let's shrink, and then let's refocus and let's go get that piece that we want to go get. And that is where I think globally, the only continent that's growing in population over the next 20 years is going to be Africa, and they probably don't act like the rest of the world anyway. So for most of us around the world, we've got to think more of a market share acquisition mindset over the next 5 years than a market growth aspect, except for a handful of, obviously, hey, you got a lot of money being thrown in something, and there will be market growth, but it's not a lot. There's very few.
So how does demographics impact that? Because you spoke about Africa predominantly, meaning that the bulk of the Asian or the more advanced economies in the Asian area are going to kind of peak out demographically. Certainly in America and Australia, we're seeing the same thing. How does demographics affect that, do you think?
Well, so let's talk about China for a second. So China has more people that are aged 53 and older than 53 and younger. That's not good.
Yeah.
And so as a society internally, they've got some serious problems that, and when we got into the trade war with China and the US, there was a lot of people who were talking about, oh, China's eating our lunch. No, they weren't. China's about to collapse. And we don't need them to collapse. We don't want them to collapse. We want them, we have not shifted anywhere near as much manufacturing as needs to shift. And to a certain degree, it's probably not in the best interest of the world for them to collapse. But there needs to be kind of a balancing and a settling out of things. And I think the harsh realities are starting to set into people as they start to see the world is a different place today than it was 10 years ago. And that trend is just hard math when it comes to demographics, because every continent in the world other than Africa is flat to declining total population.
Yeah.
That's just harsh math that people have to address. Now, so in that, you got to look at it and say, where's the slice that I play in? And, where's that demand going to come from? And to a certain degree, I've got to think about going this way in either additional things that I do to cover my overhead or geographies that I cover. And so you're going to see more businesses that survive be bigger and more diverse than the hyper specialization that we've seen in the last 25 years. And I've had more discussions with clients that are doing this rather than
horizontally
this.
rather than vertically. Yeah. It's there's a lot of things that are coming together. So how do you see it in America or Australia in terms of demographics? Because there are things that happen at stages of life. You mentioned China's a 53, there's a peak there, or there's a transition. So there are different things that we know that happen. For example, people will retire eventually, or the average person will retire. So how's that happening? And from the baby boomer generation, how is that beginning to impact the economy from this point onwards?
So I get asked this question all the time. Well, if I was going into business today, what would I do? I said, well, I'd do something necessary. Yes. So what is the thing that is probably the least likely to be overtly influenced by AI? And I would do that, because that's going to have the longest tail to it. Unless you just love chaos and disruption, and you're one of those people that can figure it out and stay ahead of the pack otherwise. But if you're in the necessaries, think about it. So I was at this week-long executive ed program at Oxford University that Entrepreneurs Organization put on in May. And one of the guys that was there was an EO member from Germany that had moved his plant to China. And this guy makes electric motors so in every robot's hands and joints, there's an electric motor that makes it move.
Yeah.
And this is a guy that's on the ground doing it. And so I trust what he's saying more than anybody else. And he said, listen, you will see a $1,000 robot in 2 years or less. Now, if you just plot that in and think about every kind of activity that needs basic intelligence and hand movement, but strength and reliability, and oh, by the way, it shows up for the shift every day, 24/7. My goodness, that starts to just change things dramatically. And so when you get back to looking at the various economies and the demographics, there's two things that you look at. You look at a country's demographic base of what's their birth rate, so how rapidly are they declining? And then two, what's their immigration policies? And is that immigration policy going to add labor that's necessary? So in the U.S., when I looked at this, thinking that AI was probably still 2 to 5 years away from truly functional, employment. I looked at it and I go, okay, we're going to have a spike in wages and we're going to have a shortage of labor. And when we turned off the border, I mean, literally there is nobody coming across the border in the U.S. right now. Yeah. And we've got probably a couple of 100,000 people that we sent back. Now, these are the bad guys, but they're going to start to send back the workers, which is, we'll see, that could have a negative impact. But really, I was just expecting not having those day laborers come over, that people that were doing the agricultural picking, the construction jobs and those things. And so between the softening of the economy and AI taking a job here and shifting that person to a job there, I don't have a single client that's struggling to find labor right now. And that's the first time probably in 7 or 8 years that we've had that situation. Yeah. Everywhere from a technical position all the way down to I need somebody to take out the trash position.
Yeah. Yeah, which is remarkable because the labor constraints were part of the primary signature of COVID, right? We like where I live in Perth, Australia, we had every single person, every meeting was talking about labor constraints. They just couldn't get anybody, and now it's a little bit the opposite here as well. Like we're seeing, I wouldn't say a glut of labor, but we're seeing a lot of availability. People are saying, a couple of years ago, I'd put an advert out and people would apply to there'd be 5 applicants, and now there'd be 120. that kind of level. But I think this is the point, Greg, is that what you and I are seeing is not what the media or the politicians are saying. It feels like we're living in a different place than they are, because things like this, either they're not impacting the broader economy, they're primarily in the mid-market and the small side of the business, or something else is going on in that, the data hasn't hit them yet or something. I don't know.
Well, see, here's where it's happening at the small business. So I get back from the Oxford class, and I do this mastermind group with a group of physical therapy practices. And these are anywhere from $1 million to $2 million annual revenue by practice. They're cash only. They do traditional physical therapy, but also the regenerative therapies. They do stem cell, hyperbaric oxygen, PRP, all those kind of things. And so the guy who puts on the group that I do the financial analysis for, they had decided we need to come up with an AI agent to help answer the phone, because they're just not getting good information to the patient. So one person on this guy's staff has never written a line of code in her life. In 30 days, she created an AI agent that answers the phone for these physical therapy practices that I watched a live demonstration of it, and I've used those therapies myself. And it answered those questions better than anybody I've dealt with in that field. Yeah. It handled interruptions, reset, reframed, call to action. And this sucker works 24/7, can handle 10 phone calls at the same time and never calls in sick. And this to me was the striking aspect, that I think AI tools are creating an enormous democratization of technology advancement that doesn't require $1 billion of investment by the average company. $1 million business can take an existing tool and create phenomenal results with just minor effort of interaction going back and forth with this agent. Now, all this lady did, who developed the tool, she just fed it scripts and then tested it and retested it and re-educated it. And it's like, it may not be perfect, although it handled everything that I heard pretty well, but it was certainly better than the humans currently doing it, which is a low bar.
And what's the cost differential? They would be paying $20 a month to guess for that. Compared to thousands.
It's a rounding error. This is the part that I haven't quite figured out yet, is what the economic model of AI is, because I'm not hearing a lot of phenomenal prices being charged. I'm hearing, and I don't know about you, but I'm hearing stories of the big companies saying, "Oh, we're going to invest $1 billion in AI." Well, you know what? They're going to fail, because it ain't about investing $1 billion. It's about doing something, and almost the people that are going to make the most out of AI are more the skunkworks kind of people. Yeah. You just get out there and do it. And the people that ask the right questions and have the right mindset, but the consultants of the world who are going to try to cash in on that, they're actually going to be the ones that get spit out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will tell you, some of these consulting firms are shaking in their boots because they're about to get eliminated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a time for entrepreneurs to have very wide eyes and be very prepared. We've got, you've been to Perth, Perth is a mining economy predominantly. And so we've got a client who is in the contracting space. They contract to the miners, large contracts, multiple millions of dollars each. They're like a $100 million business approximately. And so they've trained AI to do all of their tender response, and which was a huge burden on them because of the environmental and social and heritage obligations. And also their estimating is now pretty close, and they need to obviously monitor the margins and they need to be across it. But this huge administration burden that they had is now gone. But on the other side, I've got some relatives who work in one of the large mining companies, and they're saying that they've also trained AI to produce the tenders at the outset and then judge the tenders that come in. So you've got AIs creating the information, being responded to, and then the response being judged today.
Yeah. And so this brings up a point we were talking about before the call. What I worry about, so this is what we hear from everybody, my own firm included, that we're investing, we're doing some testing of AI to produce tax returns. And it's like, okay, great, big whoop-de-doo. And so, and the belief is, and everybody has this idea, okay, well, we're going to get AI to do all the grunt work, and then we're going to have a senior person review what AI produces just as a safety measure. Okay, so you're going to eliminate all this low-level grunt work, which sounds great. Where do you think the senior people came from originally? And I'll tell you, I was talking to a client of mine today that is really on the cutting edge of innovation and leadership coaching with some large businesses. And we were talking about this very same thing. And I said, you've got to make sure that these big companies understand you will get a moment of benefit by eliminating this low-cost labor. And then you will gut the very existence of your company because if you do not build a way to get that junior to a senior. Yeah. And I said, the best example I can think of is, in the world of F1 racing and NASCAR racing, those race car drivers will actually prepare for the next race by going into a simulator to deal with the feel of the different banking and those kind of things of that next course. And one of the areas that somebody's going to probably, take a look at and perfect in this is it's one thing to create skills for people, but it's another thing to create reps. It's more about the reps than the skill. The skill, matter of fact, I'd almost rather somebody be minimally skilled and then develop them with reps and add skills as they develop reps. But I'm not hearing anybody talk about creating training that literally gives you a rep and accelerates experiential learning from that standpoint.
And so it's hard because the whole AI topic is so complex, and it's not bounded by time. When we were talking about COVID, we knew that there was a vaccine happening somewhere and that these things have come and they've gone before, but we can very easily slip between the month that we're in a year from now and 10, 20, 30 years. So it's very hard to get some boundaries to think about the challenges that we're faced with. So for mid-market businesses specifically, how should they be positioning themselves best, do you think, right now in the street fighter economy?
Well, I think number one, it's an execution-based economy. It's the companies that are faithful in execution day in and day out. They're really separating from the pack. And so we're still in an economy globally that has pretty pathetic execution day in and day out across the business landscape. And anybody who's really good at it stands out incredibly. And so if you're one of those excellent executors, you want to look at finding, and once again, it's not about continuous growth. It's finding your share of the market. So think about it. I always talk about the price elasticity curve. So think about it. Nordstrom is the highest price, but the least amount of customers. Walmart is the lowest price and the greatest amount of customers. Well, I don't really want to be either one of those. There's problems with both. I want to live in that elbow of the curve. There's an optimal point. And so I've really kind of dubbed this the age of optimization. I think we want to find what is the optimized size, market share, executional capacity of my business at the moment, to where, and the concept that we talked about at the Oxford session was, what's your moat? What's your moat that you can build around your business? Because you will have to face an onslaught of the marketplace. Because when you get into a market share street fight type economy, you will have to defend yourself from the scourge that will try to one of the worst things in the world, we used to see this back in the 60s and 70s when the economy would go through periods of true kind of malaise. People that had money would just buy the market and just, just bludgeon you with money because if you didn't have the ability to defend that, then you were in tough shape. We haven't seen that much in the last 20 years, but I think it's going to start to come back. And I think it will, much as I love I love the fact that smaller businesses, private businesses make up such a dominant part of the economy, we are probably going to see the pendulum swing back the other way. And then here's the reason why. Over the past 10 years, we've had massive, massive amounts of private equity investment. The classic private equity model is, okay, we're going to make an investment, we're going to flip you to another private equity firm, and then maybe even another one, and then finally go public. Well, because of interest rates, those are largely finance deals with some equity, but mostly debt. The debt structure doesn't work right now, and the cash flow doesn't retire the debt. And so essentially the second and third private equity deals are just not there. And so now there's a push to more companies that were private equity invested in. They've got to create a path to public ownership of either acquired by public or go public themselves. And I've got a potential project with $1 billion plus client up in Canada that it's interesting. I mean, they've got multiple operating units and it's going to be really fascinating. But, but there again, I'm kind of looking at this as like, they're coming to somebody like me because they don't have financial clarity of all of their operating units and once again, this is a company that went this way. They didn't go this way. They went this way to get big. And now, I mean, it's just absolute chaos. And what we're helping them do is essentially create a common communication structure across a diverse set of businesses so that we're related, but we're doing different things, but yet we can all talk the same financial language, kind of like the project we did, with your clients that, 8 different businesses that were totally different, but yet we all had a great discussion that day of understanding each other's business of here's your profit to gross margin, and everybody's on the same target. Here's your return on invested capital. And everybody has a different capital signature depending on what area you're playing in. But if you understand those two things, then you really start to have some insight of you're way ahead of somebody who's just clueless as to how that works in that process.
Yeah, and what you started off there is definitely something that we're seeing. Before the call, before we started recording, you mentioned, well, what are you seeing across your client base relative to changes in the economy? And broadly, what we're seeing is that people are executing well and are much less affected compared to peers or their competitors who are not. So it's a bit like all the hard work that you've done working on the business is now paying off on two fronts because you're more prepared in this tough economy to withstand the storms or the shocks, but moreover, you're much more ready to implement any AI changes that are happening right now.
Yeah. Well, and the one thing you've got to remember right now that we've gotten away with for the last 25 years, we could always use growth to get us out of the hole when we make a bad choice. And that's not there. And you've got to be better capitalized. And then it's very much like, A/B testing in marketing examples. You've got to test, analyze, read, and feather that investment in. And the ones that go big or go home, I mean, you're going to see some carnage. You're going to see some stuff that those ideas of the things that entrepreneurs did in the last 25 years probably not going to work as well. This one is going to have to be much more well thought out, much better executed. And you've got to execute in a constantly changing labor environment. And then getting back to AI, here's the other thing that you got to think about with AI. So what happens when you get a technological advancement? So we saw this when people were using international labor. So they go offshore. And so like a person that I could hire, a 5-year CPA in the US would be $100,000 a year. I can get that person similar skill set that would probably work harder and do better at $2,000 a month instead of $10,000 a month. And it's like, so at first you thought, oh, this is great, and you're billing at the same price that the other person did. Well, guess what? As soon as everybody else does the same thing, you got to bring that price down. And you eventually, our signature metric of labor efficiency ratio, the multiplier that you get in margin off of the wages that you're paying starts to compress back to the norm. And this is, so, we'll see people, so we talked about before, the common 80+% of the businesses work off of a 2. I got to get $2 of gross margin for every dollar of labor, regardless of what they do. Well, when I get this really wonderful piece of the market, I can get 250, and I'm at 35% profit to gross margin, at that level. But it doesn't last because the market finds out what you're doing. They start competing, and everybody gradually comes back to the norm. So this sets up the biggest social conundrum that I think we will face in our lifetime. Early on, when we're getting the 250 LER instead of a 2, and we're at 35% profit to gross margin because we've effectively delivered AI and we're feeling really good about ourselves, but we got 15% unemployment, unrest, turmoil. What do? Minimum basic income. Now, this is not Norway's minimum basic income, where they get to use the North Sea oil royalties to pay that minimum basic income. There's got to be a funding source. The funding source has to come from someplace. And so when you start to have that kind of situation, that's what I'm really worried about with how rapidly this AI is happening, because it's eliminating jobs faster than we're having shrinking population.
Yeah.
Now, if the AI was taking over jobs as the population declined, everything would be good. Then the best performers would be making a really good profit. The worst performers would be okay, maybe, occasionally go out of
It'd
business.
match.
Yeah, it'd match off. But see, this is where we're going to have this dissonance. And we got to watch for that as business owners, of something happening more rapidly than its compensating effect. And we'll see. I was thinking we would be okay. I was thinking we would actually have a spike in inflation in wages before AI would kick into high gear and start eliminating jobs. And no, it's the singularity is here, not near. And so
we are seeing it, as I've already said, all over the place. Real changes, and it's accelerating every quarter, every 90 days. It's changing things more and more. We need to operate in an environment of business planning. Okay, so we need to predict the future as best we can. And it's becoming harder to predict. As you know, we work on a 3-year prediction, a 3-HAG, a 3-year, and we work on a 1-year. What's your advice, or it's the hardest question you're going to get asked all week, what's your advice for mid-market leaders who need to try to plan out for 3 years and 1 year in this challenging environment?
Well, I mean, a man who aims at nothing hits it with amazing accuracy, so you do have to aim at something. But I will tell you, forget about the annual planning cycle. I think, what your team has to start doing is essentially every quarter, you got to dig deep and have an annual plan effort once a quarter. That's how fast it's changing. Over the next 24 months, if you are not digging deep once a quarter, spending a day, get away from operations and focus your mind on trends of the market and every piece of market information. You cannot go into your foxhole. The world will have run past you by the time you stick your head up. Matter of fact, it's more going to be whack-a-mole, more than likely, when you stick your head up. And then, you do have to set that plan. And I am a huge fan. I am more of a fan of Shannon's 3-HAG than the B-HAGs. I've never seen one to me that made sense. 3-HAGs, love it. That's where my mindset goes. But there again, you also got to realize, this goes back to the book I mentioned on the previous one, Quit by Annie Duke. When it's not feasible, I have to abandon that idea and move on to something else. There's a point that we're not going to climb Mount Everest because we miss the point of no return at the wrong time, or we'll die.
Yeah.
And that's where people have to understand, yes, it's great to be dogmatic and dig in and grit and all those things, but don't be stupid. And, there's sometimes it's just physics that it won't work. And once again, it goes back to, you've got to have provisions for this journey. And the provisions are fully capitalized, overly reliant on debt. Because debt is not your friend in a chaotic environment. Capital can be far more patient. Now you gotta pay attention to the terms of the capital, make sure you don't get ratcheted to death. But capital can be far more patient than debt ever could be. But more than likely, I mean, we're still finding very, very, very few of our clients need outside capital if they will commit to profitability and execute within their plan. They create plenty of capital out of their profitability, just don't have an overdeveloped sense of need of what I got to take out of the business. But if I can leave it all in, I mean, we've got a client right now that's scheduled, they were at, $30 million of revenue, and they're going to double in the next 12 months.
Yeah.
But they will not need to use a dime of outside capital to do it if they execute to plan. And we have full belief that they will. But there again, that's because we can, it's not about predicting the P&L, it's about predicting the balance sheet. Same thing, one of the clients I worked with is an advisor. They were looking at selling, and I did some analysis of the acquirer, and the acquirer was over leveraged. I mean, it was, the earnout payment was not going to happen.
Yeah.
They were way behind the bank in terms of that earnout payment. And so the deal fell through. And so we've been working with them to meeting their growth goals. And they had talked to another advisor that was talking to them about raising capital. I go, why do you need to raise capital? You're profitable. I can forecast out the next 5 years, and you're not going to need any money if you keep doing what you're currently doing. You just need to go execute. And it's like, this mindset is so frustrating to me, that there's so many businesses that do not need a bank or an outside investor if they just execute to commitment of profitability and market share acquisition of just good actions to go capture that market.
Yeah. Yeah. But the bank is a salesperson. The bank is selling debt. And so they're gonna work to sell you debt so that they can make their numbers, right? But people don't necessarily think like that often.
No.
They think, well, the bank tells me that I need capital or I need money to grow, so I should go and get a loan.
So what's interesting is, when we have businesses hit our metrics, so, you've seen our 4 cornerstones. And so the idea being, okay, we want you to hit your minimum return on invested capital of profit to the capital invested. We want you to be at 20% profit to gross margin. We want you to hit your LER that gets you, total LER to get you to that number. And we want you to have 2 months of cash in your business with nothing drawn on a line of credit. I'm fine with term debt for productive equipment, but just don't have any floating debt.
Yeah.
What's funny is, when our clients hit those 4 metrics, we never talk to the bank. Matter of fact, hopefully my bosses aren't listening to this, very, very, very few of our consulting clients need opinion financial statements. Because they're so profitable. They're net depositors with the bank. And when they need a term loan, bank says, hey, they got a piece of equipment back in the note. It's like, nobody, hey, just give us your tax return and that financial model that Simple Numbers does, that'll be fine. And it's like, it tells you something that if you think that the financial metrics the bank is having you live under on your covenants is good operation, you're grossly flawed. That's not the target. And if you hit what is possible in every industry that we've seen, and we've seen all of them, your bank's going to send you a note because you got money with them, but it's not because you borrowed much, if anything at all, like I said, except for either real estate that is producing or a piece of equipment that's producing. But I don't need a $10 million line of credit.
That's great. And that's a great segue to my question about a better business. How would you define a better business?
Well, it's one that, like you said, they know what they're aiming at. So it's not an experiment. It's something that's a known. It's doing something that, I hate to say it, but I love the necessaries. They're boring, but they're necessaries, and they can do those necessary things in an extraordinary way. And it's like, I'll give you an example. One of my clients is a sod farm in Florida. And the owner, she bought the sod farm from her dad, and she has quadrupled the revenue, but she is more than quadrupled the profitability. She is just an awesome, awesome entrepreneur. But it's like, she is just so focused And once again, she didn't do it singularly. They were originally a wholesale business. Now they've opened up retail, and then got into not only selling their sod retail, but installing the sod retail. And now the next step is them to set up their own turf care business because they're the experts. They grew the grass to begin with. Why wouldn't you want them to take care of it? I mean, it's like, but everything they do is profitable. And when we've created a process for them to see every action that they take is its own little slice of the business, and it's hitting its numbers. And when it starts to drift, okay, you take action. Why is it drifting? Is it a person problem? Is it a market problem? Is it a strategy? You know, take any one of those things. And that's what you guys are really good at with your clients is really, if you have the data, your guys can go in and really help them think through it because, you know this, every entrepreneur is just too much in the weeds and they can't see it sometimes. And they need, people like what your guys do, which are really good at just giving them that second set of eyes, but you need that data. And unfortunately, my profession sucks at delivering functional data to businesses, especially as they grow and get more diverse. But it's like our Australia client, I love working with them because the businesses are in kind of a similar field, but they're independent. I mean, this portfolio entrepreneur mindset is just one of my favorite. Is like, go find a good business. Yeah. Business is business. It works.
Yeah. Yeah. And it'd be fascinating for you to analyze the data across that portfolio being somewhat equal in nature.
Well,
in terms of financials.
Here's the cool thing in that one. So this is our newest thing. So for these portfolio businesses, we're getting people to shift away from management fee mindset to dividend payment. Yeah. And so it's like, listen, no, we're not going to charge you a management fee. We want you to give us a dividend for us investing in your company. And here's the dividend structure you got to pay taxes. You got to leave some money in for working capital growth. And the rest needs to come to us as a dividend. Well, you can't argue with that. I want you to be a good investment.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In these times of a rapidly changing economy, environment, lots of things that are happening, I think that the book recommendations are quite pertinent. What's a book that you would recommend for our audience at the moment?
Well, it's one of those that I think we're in kind of a wasteland in terms. I've not run across a ton of good books lately, but I will tell you the person that I love to get my current insights because of this rapidly changing environment is a guy named Owen Gregorian, is on Twitter or X, and actually works with Scott Adams. Scott Adams was the creator of the Dilbert cartoons. But Owen, he will tweet out every morning about 7 to 10 news articles from all kinds of different sources. And so he has curated really some of the best information I think I've seen of scientific discoveries, research, business, some politics. But I mean, it has become my first news source versus any of the mainstream. I still have to kind of monitor the mainstream media just to see what people are saying. But I've picked up more, cool bits of information, from that, because I really think it's almost like if somebody wrote a book right now, it'd be obsolete in 6 months, because things are changing so rapidly. So, and I'm sure there's some people, working on some stuff, but that's I've come more and trying to find more of those newer avenues to work on. And I think to a certain degree, signing up for things like Harvard Business Review, one of the cool things is, when I went to the Oxford executive ed program that EO put on, I now am in the Oxford Alumni Network because of that executive ed program. And so it's kind of neat. And I will tell you, I mean, attending a place like Oxford with centuries, not decades, centuries of deep learning, it's a pretty cool place. I have to admit. Nice. We had, the professors were awesome. And so, I mean, I wish I could take a year off of work and just go get my PhD, but that's not going to happen. But it did inspire me. I think, I think I've got one probably big life work left. I think I will probably pursue a PhD in entrepreneurship somewhere. And then what I want to produce is a book that would be, if I was creating accounting today from scratch, what would it be? Because it needs to help the entrepreneur, not work against them. And I've been noodling on some ideas that I think could be kind of the mother of all functional accounting books that really truly help people run great businesses. And think of it like this, in a sense, it's almost like the idea of a website. Websites allowed you to create a business with multiple doors. Mm-hmm. Well, if accounting does what it's supposed to do, and especially with AI and data like it is now, we have more ability to do this than ever. I need a data set that does three things. One, if I need to give general accepted international financial reporting standard reports to the bank, it can do that. If I need to give financial data to the tax people, but I need to give data to the business owner that violates plenty of the rules that both of those do. But it all has to reconcile back to the same core set of data. And then that's my vision of it needs to be able to do all three. And I think it can.
Well, I speak on behalf of the audience. We would be very fascinated to read that book. And it really broadly speaks to the problem that we see regularly, which is trying to get financial people to produce business numbers or numbers to run the business it can be quite the challenge. And look, it's been your life's work, so I get it, you get it.
Yeah, I've had a few reps.
So how can people learn more about you and your business?
Yeah. I'm sorry, say that one more time.
No problem. How can people learn more about you and your business?
Right. Yeah. So simplest thing, two places. So the firm itself that we do our consulting work, simple numbers, CRI.com. There's contact form. You can reach out to us. And then myself I've got a speaker website that lists the books, gregcrabtree.net. So you can go there and look at, there's some extra articles, that we've written there. But on the simple numbers, CRI.com website, surprisingly enough, people have, we do this podcast every week that I usually do about one of them a month, but my other two partners, Mike Maxon and Brandon Gray, do one about every week. And we've developed a pretty good following. And there, once a month, we're going to talk about our 100 company model. We update it every month. And so as soon as we get that most recent month's data, they'll do an episode where we talk about, here's what we're seeing. And to be quite honest, I'm not going to claim we're the greatest statisticians in the world, but you know what? I think our insights have been truer than what the government's has been, and we'll stand by that.
Beautiful. Greg, what haven't we covered off today that you wanted to cover off?
Well, I do want to encourage the entrepreneurs. So if you're a competitive person, you're going to love this environment because, the last 25 years being the participation trophy economy, the best businesses didn't always win because your best ability was your availability. And you could just open up and roll out the ball and have a game. And some of those people, luck played a little more, favor to it. This is real competition. And I think those businesses that are great, those businesses that can build businesses with great cultures, this is the first time ever, I can honestly say, in the last 2 years, I've seen businesses with good culture separate from ordinary businesses in both profitability and market share acquisition. I could not say that prior to then because we would talk about it all the time about having great culture. It just didn't make a difference to the bottom line in most cases that we saw. He felt better about it, but it's like it wasn't economically, and sometimes it was actually an economic detriment. But now, no, it's starting to create that separation, which I like that kind of environment. And so, yes, we're going to tell you plenty of challenges, but it's a great time to be an entrepreneur if you're willing to go in there and roll up your sleeves and punch your competitor in the nose and say, hey, take that.
What a lovely way to end. Greg, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your wisdom. It's an interesting time, and it's been great to dig into that and to learn more from you. Much appreciated.
Yeah, appreciate it, and happy to join anytime.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.